Hi, welcome back. In this last video, I want to say a few words about the third project, but it's also quite clear, I hope, in the slides. So the first thing to say about the third project is that the style and structure and approach is the same as projects 1 and 2. You have your data, you can heavily rely on what is already in the labs, so you can do your own analysis, your own extensions, etc., but it's not necessarily required. You can actually copy-paste some of the graphs from the labs that are provided and write an essay around that. The essay is more to see whether you can translate, whether you have a bit of an understanding what these models try to do, and whether you can translate that to a more general audience, a social science audience in this case, in terms of interpretation. So the structure is very much the same. So based on labs 8 to 11, which is all the text analysis, you can actually choose one of 3 different topics. So it's entirely up to you, but do choose one. Do not try to answer 2 or more of these. So you can either write about the general topics of State of the Union speeches by US presidents over time. Do you see any noticeable patterns? Do you see any variation between parties? Do you see any variation over time? Is there anything interesting to see in terms of what State of the Union speeches are about? Secondly, you can decide to write about ideological positioning. Can we find underlying dimensions in the data based on these speeches? You can use factor analysis or PCA or clustering or topic models to see if there's an ideology underlying it, whether it's not just about different topics that are relevant at different times, but that the topics or the contents, the word usage also depends on some kind of underlying dimension. And you can try to interpret what this underlying dimension might be. And third, you can write specifically on Donald Trump and see whether Donald Trump is an outlier, is very different from other presidents, or is really much more, or is really similar to existing presidents, other presidents, in terms of word usage, rhetoric, positioning, etc. Yeah, so any of these 3 topics, whichever you prefer, you can write the essay around. In terms of the analysis, you should use 1 or 2 approaches from the main topics that we have studied: cluster analysis, principal components, factor analysis, word scores, word fish, or topic modeling. You can also use other visualizations or tables or word clouds, but they should be used in addition to, not instead of 1 or 2 of these other approaches. We then write an essay, a longer essay, 2 to 2,500 words, excluding, of course, the captions and the tables and the bibliography from the count. But it should be in one document with the tables and figures and etc. Yeah, but the word count is based on the actual text that you write. Be very sure that you write not about the methods, but about the application. So, of course, you need to describe the methods, especially in the second section. You need to describe what the methods are. You need to make explicit how you interpret those. But the focus of the essay is not a report on an analysis. It is a description of a finding using this analysis. So write the essay, especially the introduction, the interpretation, write it around the finding. Don't write it around the method. And as before, there is a sort of suggested structure that you do not have to rigidly follow. You need a short introduction where you outline what your argument is, why this is interesting, what kind of data you have. Sorry, no, why this is an interesting topic, what you're going to analyze, and what you expect to find. Then in the second block, you focus on the data that you have. You describe the data set, you describe what it comes from, how it is structured, how it's going to be used, why this is interesting data. You describe the methods you're going to apply, and what these methods are used for and how we can use that in this case and why this is relevant. Then the third, you present your graphs, your tables, visualizations, etc. from your analysis, and you also provide a brief interpretation what this means. And then fourth, you bring it all back into context. In the first, in the introduction, you explained what you, why it's interesting to look at this, what we might find, what to expect to find. Now you conclude and discuss to what extent you do find it, what the implications might be for our understanding of politics, social science, etc. And throughout, you want to, of course, have proper referencing when necessary. To find some literature that you can use Google Scholar, and there's a bunch of different examples here, terms that you might look for. You should be familiar with that by now. And you should really at least have 2 or 3 academic references, ideally a bit more. That is either around the application in politics or maybe a little bit around the methods. Here, the slide focuses very much on ideological positioning, but it really depends, of course, on which of the 3 questions you take. So just find the relevant literature that you think is important. Ideally, you create a separate Markdown file, use that to write the assignment and put in all the code, but you can also write it in Word and then insert whatever you need. The important thing is that in the end, whether it is in Markdown or in Word, you need to create a PDF. I want to see a PDF which has both the tables and the graphs and the text relevant for the essay. And if the code is not in that file, then you should put that in a separate file. But make sure that whether you use our Markdown or Word, make sure it really reads like an essay with an introduction, a body, a conclusion, and it does not read like a technical report on a number of steps taken. And the deadline is the 5th of May at 1 p.m. I'm not sure why it says recommendation. It's a deadline. It's not a recommendation. 5 p.m., 5 May, 5th of May, sorry, 1 p.m. And you can email it to me. Okay, good luck. And if you have any questions about this during the lecture, please sign up for a one-on-one session and ask your questions. Bye then.